Chag Sameach. A beautiful morning celebrating a revelation, meeting God at Mount Sinai. The main message of our holiday of Shavuot and the book of Ruth, which we'll be reading in just a few moments, is that every moment is an opportunity to crown the day. That we each have the power and the ability to be royalty. Reading the book of Ruth, we can learn the fast track to the crown that awaits us, the recipe for success, which is living life with kindness, chesed, performing deeds of loving kindness, celebrating the royalty in our midst, everyday heroes who are all around us. Ruth is a story that highlights everyday heroes that live with kindness in the midst of tragedy and loss, that maintain a life of hope and optimism. And through it all, at every opportunity, they perform acts of kindness. They bring light to darkness. They crown each and every moment. Each of the main characters in the book, in the Megillah, Ruth, Naomi, Boaz, do just that. They live each day wisely, living kindness bravely, sometimes brazenly, sometimes gently. So why do we read the book of Ruth on Shavuot? Ruth is a beautiful short story set during the barley and wheat harvest, exactly the season that we are in now in Israel. Ruth is considered the first Jew by choice, converting and accepting Judaism as her own, joining the Jewish people with their own personal Sinai experience. Just as we renew our commitment and connection, our promise to live by our Jewish traditions, renewing the covenant at Mount Sinai today, on the anniversary when our ancestors stood at Mount Sinai. What better day than to read the story of the first Jew by choice, since aren't we all Jews by choice? I'm not sure if you're the type of person that jumps to the last page of a book before you start reading it, but there is a spoiler alert that's going to happen, because if you don't know, the end of the book of Ruth ends with the birth of a child, moving from loss and tragedy to hope and a brighter future. And that child will be the father of King David, meaning that Ruth, the convert, is the grandmother of the great King David, the warrior poet, the great leader of our people who has an intrinsic tie to Shavuot. For our tradition says that on this day he was born and King David also died. So perhaps we read the Megillah, this biblical book, because it foretells of the arrival of King David, who himself wrote 5 books, the 5 books of Psalms, which are divided into 5 sections, into 150 chapters, the poetic songs that parallel the 5 books of Moses. If you have the source sheet, you can see, we'll just look at the first source. The rabbi's question, why is the book of Ruth included in the Tanakh, the Bible itself? Because this book doesn't tell us anything about halakha, about Jewish law. It doesn't tell us what's pure, what's impure, what's kosher, what's not kosher, what's prohibited or what's permitted. What purpose it is written, Rabbi Zera asks. Why is it included in the Tanakh if it doesn't teach us any mitzvot, any halakha, any laws? What would be its purpose? Similar to the question that Rashi asks about the first book of the entire Torah, Bereshit, Genesis. If the Torah is about laws and instruction, then why not begin with the first commandment of the Torah, which is, and the Jewish people, which is in the beginning of the book of Exodus, or the middle of the book of Exodus? The answer that Rashi gives is that we begin with Genesis and Bereshit because it tells the origins of our people, our tribal beginnings, a family story that stresses and teaches us the core values of kindness, loyalty, trust, and faith. And Rabbi Zera answers that same answer. Ruth is included in the Tanakh, in the Bible, because it teaches us how great is the reward for those who perform deeds of loving kindness, chesed. Following the tradition of Abraham and Sarah, Rebecca, and so many of our ancestors, Ruth is known for kindness. And this story reminds us all that society benefits from the generosity of the behavior of individuals. And the results of compassion are true. We can see it in our world. And though Naomi and Boaz both clearly live lives of kindness and gratitude, Ruth, our biblical namesake, is our highlighted heroine. a woman who begins our story as a poor, homeless foreigner, a young childless widow not accepted in society. She becomes our highlighted, named hero, an everyday hero that goes to work in a field, is a primary caregiver to her widowed mother-in-law. She is a breadwinner in her family, and eventually a mother and grandmother to the King of Israel. We root for Ruth, not just because we love stories of the underdog overcoming hardship, but rather because of her enduring and contagious kindness, chesed, her genuine kindness that inspires others to reciprocate with kindness. In fact, her name is the only clue that we need. It's a secret that shows the essence of a person. As the rabbis say, kach shemo, one's name, one lives out the legacy or the destiny given to us by our name. There are many different etymologies of the name Ruth that the rabbis have, but first among them is the Hebrew word rivaya, which means overflowing. From kosi rivai, that my cup is overflowing, from Psalm 23. For Ruth was a woman whose kindness overflowed in her lives. When we meet Naomi, Ruth's Jewish mother-in-law, she describes herself as bitter and empty. She tries to send her daughter-in-laws back home to Moab. Stay so that you can have a future and a family of her own. But Ruth remains by her side, selfless, giving up her own identity. She clings to Naomi. She transcends her own personal needs, a courageous and compassionate choice, pledging, I will follow your people, who will be my people. In this story, kindness is shown through the qualities of loyalty, of charity, of selflessness, of optimism, and hope. These are truly recipes for living a good life and a royal life that we can aspire to. Another quality of kindness is being open-minded and opening our eyes to see that which is not necessarily in our sight, whether it's the kindness that others show us or the hardship that strangers endure that exists in our neighborhoods that we often turn a blind eye toward or simply overlook. And here we learn about Boaz. He sees a poor stranger in his fields. He could have made a rash judgment, thrown her out, but instead he welcomed her. He gives her his crop's gleanings. Even though she wasn't known to him, somehow he knew of her. Her kindness had already become known, well known. Her everyday kindness that she showed to her mother-in-law branded her a superhero, inspiring Boaz to act with generosity. Some say that Boaz said to himself, you can't be a stranger. You remind me of our ancestors, Abraham and Sarah, who journeyed from a foreign land and lived lives framed by kindness. Ruth is an outsider, a foreigner, not accepted into Israeli society, but still she is our heroine because she exemplified the highest values that we hold, the highest Jewish values of kindness and loyalty and love. Ruth, through her everyday kindness, was able to transcend an eternal law. She was a Moabite, and you might know that Moabites were sort of cursed by our people because the Moabites, when the Israelites wandered through the wilderness for 40 years, the Jewish people went to Moab, sought shelter, sought water and food, and even though they were cousins, they were turned away. And there, the Torah actually says that you're not allowed to marry a Moabite. But Ruth, through her everyday kindness, was able to transcend this seemingly eternal law, reversing the curse by cleaving to kindness. By living a life of loyalty and love, she merited the crown of the Jewish people, elevating royalty from a lowly Moabite who exhibited the best of Jewish values, becoming an everyday hero with a heart of gold. Perhaps her name Ruth is taken from the Hebrew word re'ut, which means friendship. Building relationships even when there are barriers that seemingly keep us far apart. I could give you more and more examples of loyalty, of kindness, of friendship, and love in the book of Ruth, and more meanings of the name of Ruth. But I think it's time that we have our beautiful chanting of the book of Ruth. Megillat Ruth is found in our Siddur, beginning on page 418. And we're going to call up Ruth Dobris. Ruth will read Ruth for us, and then